Hello again, Derived Energy here. Okay, as promised, here are a couple of thought experiments for you that I regard as bolstering Benatar's position. Okay, so the first one is, imagine you are strapped to a chair and you know that a sadistic torturer is about to enter the room and start to slowly kill you over a period of hours in the most gruesome and horrifically painful manner possible. Now, imagine also that there is a vial of lethal pills within reach, and you could take these pills and kill yourself before the deranged executioner begins his hideous acts of barbarity on your person. Right, then, would it then make sense to avail yourself of said pills in order to avoid your miserable and truly wretched predicament? Or would you ponder that as nothingness has no meaning or worth in relation to your current existence, that it would be a fruitless and unjustified act? Now, you might well refrain from taking those pills if you ever found yourself in such a position, but then that would mean you had never seen the horror movie Hostel. Personally, I would not back those pills without a moment's hesitation, because the amount of pain and agony that someone can inflict on you is it's almost inconceivable. Sat in the comfort of our bedroom or wherever we happen to be watching YouTube videos. It's difficult to conceive of it. This thought experiment just illuminates that at least under certain circumstances, non-existence does in fact confer an advantage over existence. If you take that pill, then you are recognizing that the non-existence does have a meaning in relation to your current existence, and under certain circumstances, then non-existence is preferable. Okay, here's another thought experiment. This goes into it demonstrates how our overriding moral concern is to prevent suffering rather than seeking to dispense pleasure in the non-existent. Okay, so even assuming that some people are actually benefited by being brought into existence, what gives you or anyone else the right to toss the dice and gamble on whether or not your child's new life pans out to be acceptable and non-repugnant to them or not? It's like, this is the thought experiment. It's like tossing gold bullion out of an aeroplane window. Some people, or even a majority of people, may benefit from such an act of madness. But what about the poor souls who were maimed or grievously injured by the gold bullion landing on them? Can the benefit to the fortunate outweigh the damage and harm done to the victims by the stupidity and short-sightedness of the gold bullion dispensing pilot? I honestly don't think it can. You see, the problem for all of you opposing my views here is that these thought experiments really do illuminate the fallacy of your thinking. At the end of the day, it is possible to consider oneself worse off by having been born, as the suicidal will all too readily inform you, but it is logically impossible to consider oneself worse off by not having been born. This is the imbalance, this is the asymmetry. This is why everyone is harmed by being brought into this world by well-meaning but sadly misguided parents. Okay. Now, first off the bat, to people here who think I should kill myself because I hold very pessimistic views towards the human condition, I would be at pains to point out the distinction that one can make between regretting one was born from a philosophical perspective and making the decision to continue one's life. And I think this distinction is well worth making, because once one is born, one, as a result of being born, from that point onwards has actual vested interest in continuing to remain alive, whereas prior to being born, no one has any vested interests in starting and emerging into the world. So, when people say to an antinatalist, why don't you just go off yourself? It's ridiculous. Okay, now we've got that out of the way, I'm going to critique some arguments that have been put forward to oppose Benatar's argument. Okay, some people argue that awarding a +1 or a -1 to pleasure and pain is an oversimplification, but to that I would say to them, imagine a life full of unadulterated bliss, joy and happiness, untainted and unsullied by any of the unpleasantness people normally experience during the course of their lives. Now, imagine the person who led this life never actually existed to enjoy this charmed life. So which scenario is better for this hypothetical person? Well, the answer is neither, because if the person existed, they might thank their lucky stars that they had been born to experience this charmed life, but if they had never been born, then they would not have been deprived of this life. So it would be irrational for them and for us to consider existence as somehow magically bestowing upon someone an advantage over their default setting and non-existence. This is why Benatar ascribes the value of zero to pleasure experience as a result of being born when judged in relation to not having come into existence. His binary values of 0 and 1 for presence, absence of pain and pleasure, therefore, are neither arbitrary nor an oversimplification when discussing the morality of procreation. Now, despite what I've said, some people will stubbornly maintain that being born is a massive plus. Oh, it's a massive plus. It's a massive plus, because they will say, if you're born, then you get to experience really cool, nice stuff and things like that. But I would counter: how can coming into existence be a massive plus when the alternative scenario, that is, not being born, would have resulted in a situation where there would not be a deprivation for the person involved, as there would be no one to experience any deprivation of pleasant mental states that would have occurred if that person had come into existence. And I would also ask, how can being born be a massive plus when, by coming into existence, everyone becomes subject to problems and hardships that would never have troubled them if they had never been born? So, yes. Another critique of Benatar is this non-identity problem, which I think is a make problem, as it were. Some people argue that because non-existent people have no intrinsic reality, we have no duty to consider them as agents for whom we have a moral duty towards. But I don't believe this problem is insoluble for antinatalism, because I would argue that non-existent potential people have a kind of relative reality by dint of drawing attention to what they are not rather than what they are. And a non-existent human being is not something that can experience pain or suffering. It's not something that can lament that it had never been born, and of course it's not subject to pain and suffering. So I think you can make these statements even though there isn't a subject who's existent, who you're making them on behalf of. Okay, so furthermore, we simply need to bear in mind that although non-existence cannot be defined or comprehended in the strictest sense of the word, everyone has an intuitive understanding of what it entails, or rather what it does not entail. Non-existence could be, I put it to you, legitimately compared to a deep unconscious and undreaming sleep in which there is no prospect of ever waking or developing awareness or consciousness. So I think you are mistaken if you maintain that we cannot have some kind of understanding regarding what this, or rather what this is not like. We can most assuredly say that it's not like our conscious and sentient moments at all, during which we are aware of ourselves and the world around us as existent beings. Now, some people will say, a non-birth is a complete nothingness, but what do you actually mean by this, people? Are you saying that a world in which I do not bring a child into the world is no different from a world in which I do decide to have a child? Are you saying that whether I have a child or not has no real consequences for the net sum of suffering in the world? I honestly don't think you can say this, and I really don't think that arguing on behalf of someone who does not currently exist but who may exist in the future is at all as ridiculous as some people make it out to be. Why do we care for the environment so much? If it were just for people who currently exist, then we wouldn't care so much, but we know we should take into consideration the impact our current ecological behaviour will have on future generations, regardless of whether these future generations have been born yet or not. So, I don't see a problem with this non-identity problem, and yes, that's what I'm going to do with this video. That's it. Please be nice.